What's going on with the deal of the century? Will the harsh debate on the Israeli right wing break it before we ever make it? Find out more about it. Let's talk about it. We'll talk about it today with Dov Lipman, that will be here. We'll talk more about archaeology in Jerusalem. It will be so interesting. So let's get started. All right, Rabbi Dov Lipman, former Knesset member and a senior manager in hostreporting.com, is joining us. Well, hi, Rabbi Lipman. How are you today?
Thank God, Zohar. Good to see you.
Okay, last time we discussed the establishment of a new unity government, as you remember. Well, the government is already sworn in, but it looks like the next steps are forming a budget and dealing with the deal of the century. So let's start with the deal of the century. What's going on there?
There's significant controversy behind the scenes in the Israeli right wing. When Trump first announced the deal of the century, and we were talking about sovereignty over the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, there was tremendous celebration. But you look at the map, as you can see right now, it's very complicated. And even though on the one hand, it would put Israeli law on Jewish communities, on the other hand, it seems to be paving the way towards a Palestinian state, which would actually cut off Jewish communities one from the other and make life very difficult for Jews who are living in Judea and Samaria. So there's a significant debate going on as to what should Israel do. Should Israel accept it anyway, because let's just accept something and we'll have sovereignty on 30% of the area? Or should we say no, because we're actually hurting ourselves towards the future?
Mm-hmm. But currently, obviously, there's no negotiation with the Palestinians. Actually, they've cut off their the security arrangements as well, and the cooperation between the mechanisms. So what does it mean when Israel says, okay, we agree to something? Does it imply that the Palestinians are going to get anything right now?
There's nothing that the Palestinians would get at the moment. The idea is that if they fulfill certain conditions, then down the road, there might be the ability towards a Palestinian state. So many on the Israeli right say, that's not going to happen anyway, so what are we afraid of? And let's take advantage of the opportunity that's in front of us. And also, let's remember, I can't imagine at the White House right now, they're thrilled with the fact that with everything happening in America, both with the coronavirus and with the situation in terms of the protests, that they have to also deal with the squabbling that's going on within the Israeli right wing instead of more cooperation on that front. And many are saying this is not the right time for us to be causing these problems. I do know that Netanyahu very much wants to move forward with this sovereignty plan of any kind, to the point that there are even whispers that are becoming more than whispers that if he's not able to do so for any reason, that might be a catalyst for another election to be called in Israel. And according to the polls, he'll be able to form a right-wing religious government and be able to move forward. Now, blue and white are cooperating at the moment. They're quiet. They're not speaking out against it. Netanyahu's real struggle, like I said before, is in the right-wing camp and not vis-a-vis his partners in blue and white.
Yeah, so actually, if it were a right-wing government, it wouldn't change anything, because the right wing is the part that opposes the current agreement, or the current deal, or whatever we call it. But so currently, actually, blue and white are okay. And specifically, I think that Gantz and Ashkenazi are personally pro-annexation. Is that correct?
There are definitely strong indications that they would go along with it, providing that there are security concerns taken care of. There was a high-level meeting last night that included the Prime Minister, Benny Gantz, Gabi Ashkenazi, David Friedman, the U.S. Ambassador to Israel, and Yariv Levin, the Knesset Speaker. And they're definitely they are going to be the ones that are going to make the final decision about this issue. Netanyahu is really trying to quiet the camp in the right wing that are being outspoken, even making statements about President Trump not being the best friend that Israel's ever had. He's trying to, massage that side of the issue while moving forward. Remember, Netanyahu has been involved in every step of the way. So whatever map is being provided, this is not a surprise to him. He's been involved in the development of this plan, and he clearly believes this is the right thing for Israel to do at this time.
Okay, let's name for a moment the opposers. We have the Yesha Council and Yamina. Where do they stand on these issues?
So certainly within the Knesset, you have Yamina, led by Naftali Bennett, who are in the opposition, a right wing in the opposition, that are very outspoken against any plan that includes a plan towards the Palestinian state. You do have the Settler Council that many of them, certainly the leaders, are against it. You do have leaders, let's say Oded Ravivi of Efrat, who is supportive of the plan. Now, don't forget, you're also starting to now hear the sound
that is actually for it.
I'm sorry?
I think he's the only one from the Yesha Council, from the Yesha mayors, let's say, that is for this center.
And just to give the viewers an understanding of what their concerns are, just as an example, there's a settlement called Itamar in Samaria in the West Bank right now, where you can drive to Tel Aviv right now 45 minutes. According to this plan, as it plays out and the roads and how they'll be maneuvered, it will take them 3 hours to get to Tel Aviv. To go from the Hebron area to Jerusalem right now, you drive up Highway 60 through Gush Etzion. If this plan plays out all the way, they'll have to drive all the way around as well. But there's also security issues in place. I also should mention, the Israeli left wing is starting to speak up again. You have this weird partnership of these extreme Israeli right wing and the Israeli left wing that are both speaking out against the plan. And we're also hearing all the noises from around the world and the consequences which they're saying will happen to Israel if they do move forward with annexation. By the way, terminology is also important. There are some who are calling it annexation, which is the implication of coming in and taking over something which is not yours. Others prefer the terminology of sovereignty because this is our biblical and our ancestral homeland, and we're just expressing our right to have Israeli law over that area.
Of course. By the way, where does Victor Lieberman stand? He himself lives in Judea, but opposed the right-wing government at the time, or
he's in the opposition now.
The formation of a right-wing government, let's say.
Yeah, he's in the opposition right now and attacking Netanyahu on all fronts, basically saying Netanyahu is not right-wing, he's all words, and he's attacking him at that level without, from what I've heard at least, not attacking the specifics of the plan itself.
And okay, let's talk a little bit about the security and mobility concerns. And was it implied, as far as you know, that if Israel accepts the plan, even at this stage, roads will have to be surrendered to the Palestinian Authority, for example, or anything like that, that will change the day-to-day life of the settlers?
This is part of what's trying to be clarified. There's a lot of vague and gray area coming out of Washington, and this is exactly what a lot of the leaders in the settler movement are trying to get clarification about, because certainly they will not agree, and they'll push very hard against Netanyahu agreeing to anything that has immediate ramifications. And I think that Netanyahu is trying to combat that and to try to make sure that there's no immediate ramifications that will hurt the settlements. Remember, there are some settlements that are quite isolated. And if they're cut off in terms of the roads and they're enveloped by any kind of a Palestinian entity, that's certainly extremely dangerous for their survival. So there's a fascinating debate taking place right now. And I think a lot of the debate has to do with what kind of rhetoric we use in the meantime as we're trying to work out the details. And I think that everyone is waiting to see what will that final map look like. And as you asked, what will the immediate ramifications be? Because no one really believes that long-term the Palestinians will keep to any of the conditions that they will need to adhere to in order to have an actual Palestinian state. But as you mentioned, there's a party like Yamina, Naftali Bennett, who says we will not agree and give our approval to anything which mentions the official path towards a Palestinian state in the heart of Judea and Samaria.
But I don't imagine that Prime Minister Netanyahu will agree to something, for example, that will cut off Gush Etzion from its connection to Jerusalem, or Hebron to Jerusalem, or anything. You mentioned the road number 60. At this point, at least, where there's no nothing advancing from in the Palestinian front. So, do you suppose that Prime Minister Netanyahu may have already agreed to anything like that?
I don't know. It's difficult for me to speculate in terms of what has happened. I will say, whatever the White House has, Netanyahu is certainly aware of. I don't believe there are any surprises there whatsoever. There's one other issue which also it relates to all of this, and that is any kind of a freeze on construction. There's indications that that might be part of this as well, and that's something which certainly the leaders of the settler movement and the settlements do not want to have, because there's natural growth that's taking place in their communities, and they view that as something which would be very detrimental. So these are all part of the details that everyone needs to understand. And remember, we're talking about July 1st as the date where this was supposed to begin to move forward. So a lot is going to be happening over the course of the next few weeks, and we'll start to see and hopefully get some indications as to which direction this is going.
Of course, and a major question is, and you mentioned it in a word, but perhaps you can talk a little bit more about it. Do the administration in DC have the bandwidth to deal with Israel and the Middle East with so much going on in the US itself?
I think this is part of what Israel might be miscalculating. We're so focused on this issue here, and it's talked about on all the talk shows, and it's being talked about in the Knesset and in the United States right now, and certainly the president, who's up for re-election in November, and polls are showing that he's losing to former Vice President Joe Biden, and that's what their focus is right now on many other issues. And I don't think they want to be bothered by the internal disputes within Israel. Now, having said that, the president might also see some kind of a spectacular movement on this issue in terms of Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria as something which could help him with his base. There are indications that he's losing some of his stronghold on the right-wing base in Israel, in America, and maybe some kind of an act which enables Israel to express its sovereignty in the West Bank might help him politically. So that's part of what they'll have to analyze. But they certainly, from what I can tell, would not have, exactly as you said it, the bandwidth to be able to deal with this kind of problem from within Israel. Therefore, Israeli leaders have to be very careful about what from our internal disputes is portrayed outwards, what kind of pressure is being put on the White House versus quiet working together with those in the White House who are in charge of this issue.
Well, okay. Actually, there is one more thing we should discuss, and that's the budget. Perhaps just in a few words. Will Israel have a budget by the end of August, as should be by law?
I definitely believe that they'll find the way to get it done. It's not going to be easy with 36 ministers and everyone pulling in different directions, and everyone wanting to make sure that they can succeed dealing with the coronavirus situation and making sure that we're planning properly for a second wave. These are all the issues that are being dealt with. It will require a lot of navigating, but I don't have a doubt that in terms of that specific issue, the two sides will come to agreement. You also have to recognize there's a lot of rhetoric going back and forth between blue and white and Likud from both directions, and the leaders of both parties are trying to get control over it. There have been members of the parties who have said that itself could lead to the breaking apart of this very fragile coalition. So we'll have to see how that plays out, specifically as they work their way towards a budget and have to come to agreement on some of the very key issues.
Yeah, I have to say that those of us who are old enough, it reminds or it brings back nostalgic memories from the unity government of the 80s, of the end of the 1980s. Large government, Likud and Avodah at the time, and everyone is pushing in their direction. In their own direction.
Generally, when you have a government of this kind, it could create general stability. It's large, it's wide-ranging. It's very rare for it to move forward with anything earth-shattering or revolutionary because of the various issues that everyone has to navigate. So if they get us through the coronavirus situation, and if they manage to do something in terms of the issue of sovereignty, I think they will view that as a success.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Rabbi Dov Lipman, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, and don't forget to check out honestreporting.com for more truth about Israel.